Hello again, gamers. Welcome back for another episode of Grokking Twilight Imperium. I'm the board game captain, and today I'm going to be telling you how to grok the Mentak Coalition. So before we get into this, I do want to say I've got a ton of links in the description down below that you can check out at your leisure. There is a link to BoardGameCaptain.com, which is a great hub for all things Board Game Captain, and also Lynn and I have started doing some semi-regular blog posts over there. Also, there's a link to my Teespring store if you'd like to get yourself some cool gamer gear, some Board Game Captain merch, t-shirts, mugs, etc. Head over to my Teespring store, and there's a link to my Patreon. If you're in a position to and would like to support the channel, you can head over to my Patreon, link in the description down below. All right, so the Mentak Coalition. So now these guys were a former penal colony that rose up and became their own nation, who also sponsors fleets of pirate ships. So think that their theme seems to be a combination of multiple former colonial nations in the real world, like Australia, because they were a former penal colony, but also some of the nations in the Caribbean who, of course, did business with the pirates during the days of the Pirates of the Caribbean. So let's get into it. Let's talk about the Mentak Coalition. What are their ups? What are their downs? What are their strengths and weaknesses? And how can you grok the Mentak Coalition? So let's start by talking about what you get when you choose to play the Mentak Coalition. So their starting system is a single planet system with the planet Mal Primus. Now, Mal Primus is a really decent starting planet. So their starting system is really good. It has 4 resources and 1 influence. Now, while it might be lacking in influence, you can always pick up other planets that give you better influence, but that 4 resources is huge. It means that your starting production limit on your first space dock in your home system is going to be 6. That's really big. That's significantly above average. Very, very nice. In addition, of course, having those 4 resources to be able to build with right from the first round of the game is nothing to sneeze at. Now, next, let's talk about their starting fleet. So the starting fleet is not quite as awesome. You have 1 carrier, you have 2 cruisers, you have 4 ground troops, 3 fighters, and a PDS. So now you have plenty of fighters and ground troops, but not really the ships to carry them all around with. You have this 1 carrier that can carry around a total of 4 of those ground troops and or fighters. So you're probably going to leave the system with 2, maybe 3 ground troops and 1 or 2 fighters for a total of 4 between the 2 of them, along with your cruisers. And you're going to be colonizing 2 or 3 planet systems, depending. Because if you leave with two ground troops, it's because you're planning to colonize 2 and 1 planet systems. If you have some 3 planet systems near you, you might want to leave with 3 ground troops for those initial colonization efforts. However, you've got these extra ground troops and extra fighters and no ships to carry them with. So very early on, you're going to want to build some more ships, including some more carriers to be able to carry around these other units to do some more colonizing, because early on they are not going to be a fast colonizer with only the ability to colonize 1 system on the first round, unless you manage to get your hands on the Warfare Strategy card, which we will talk about more when I'm talking about the strategy cards. Okay, so now let's talk about their starting abilities. So they have a pair of very good starting abilities. So the first ability is Ambush. At the start of a space combat, you may roll 1 die for each of up to 2 of your cruisers or destroyers in the system. For each die, roll equal to or greater than that ship's combat value. Produce 1 hit. Your opponent must assign it to 1 of his ships. So this is a really cool ability. Now, it has its own description of how it works, and it doesn't count as a combat roll, so that's important, because effects that would affect a combat roll will not affect this, though it effectively works the exact same way as a combat roll, except that it happens at the start of the space combat before anyone else does anything else. So having a pair of cruisers with each of your fleets is going to be very beneficial, because you'll get that extra attack that with the cruiser Mark 1s hits on a 7 or better for 2 of your cruisers in that system. If you're a little resource poor, you could settle for a couple of destroyers, but of course destroyer Mark 1s only hit on 9s, so not as impressive. cruisers if you can get them. And you do start with a couple cruisers, and you will have enough resources that hopefully you'll be able to build a carrier and maybe another cruiser or even 2 cruisers with your second fleet that you build on your first round. And having lots of those cruisers around with most of your fleets is going to be very beneficial because of this ability. Now, the other ability is Pillage. After one of your neighbors gains trade goods or resolves a transaction, if he has 3 or more trade goods, you may take one of his trade goods or commodities. So now this is going to very much motivate you to make a beeline with one of your starting cruisers to park it next to one of your opponent's areas of space, because you have to be a neighbor with someone to take the ability Pillage and use it. Now, just a reminder, you're not a neighbor unless you have either ships or control of a system adjacent to a system that has either ships of your opponent or they have control of that system. So you're going to want to get one of your ships over there on the border of one of your opponents that's next to you. Now, which one it is going to depend on who's to your left and who's to your right in the series of pie wedges of the galaxy. So if you are next to certain players that can start getting lots of trade goods early game, even round 1, like for instance the Clan of Sar or the Emirates of Hakan, who both have abilities that let them start getting tons of trade goods right away, you're going to want to go for them. Because you're going to be able to exploit their abilities to get lots of extra abilities on your own. Now, if you don't have a faction next to you like that, you're probably just going to want to go towards whoever it is that you're going to want to pick a fight with, while trying to talk alliances with the player on the other side, hopefully. But yeah, these abilities are really good, though you do have to be wary about not ticking off too many people. So like I say, pick a fight with someone on one side and try to make friends with someone on the other side. Now, in that regard, there is a really cool promissory note that they get. I don't normally talk about promissory notes, but this one is a good one to trade with the person on your other side to be able to work out an alliance, and it is Promise of Protection. Action. Place this card face up in your play area. While this card is in your play area, the Mentak player cannot use his Pillage faction ability against you. If you activate a system that contains one or more of the Mentak player's units, return this card to the Mentak player. So this is a great way to be like, look, I'm not going to steal your stuff. I mean, which is what you'd promise of someone you're going to be allied with anyway, but you put it in writing. You're like, here, take this card, put it in your play area. Now you know it. You know I'm not coming after you. Okay, so the next thing I'd like to talk about is the flagship for the Mentak Coalition. It's a pretty decent one. It's not one of the best, but it is good, and it's got a really cool ability. It's called Fourth Moon. It costs 8. It has a combat of 7 times 2, which means it hits as well as 2 cruisers, not bad. It has a movement of 1 and 3 capacity and sustained damage. Most of that's pretty common amongst flagships, but its ability is what's really interesting. Other players' ships in this system cannot use sustained damage. So if you have a flagship with a bunch of cruisers who get those ambush hits, if your opponent takes hits on any of their big ships that would normally be able to take sustained damage, like say their flagships, their War Suns, or their Dreadnoughts, they're dead. They have to die. So they're probably going to be taking hits on fighters if they have them available. But when you're fighting against certain factions that really love to lean into those bigger ships, like lots of Dreadnoughts, those lots of Dreadnoughts are not really going to be that much better than your fleet of cruisers and your flagship, because you're going to get the extra chances to hurt them. And if they're hit, they're dead. It's one hit and dead. It's like an automatic direct hit on every one of your opponent's sustained damage ships. So yeah, very decent. It can very much make the fleet with Fourth Moon much better when facing more powerful fleets. It's not better when facing fleets full of smaller ships like cruisers and destroyers, but when facing anything like a Dreadnought, flagship, or War Sun, suddenly your fleet is much more powerful. Next, I want to talk about the Agent, Commander, Hero, and Mech. So the Agent, which of course you start with at the very beginning of the game, is after the Pillage faction ability is used against another player. And a quick reminder, the Pillage is the one where it says after one of your neighbors gains trade goods or resolves a transaction. If he has 3 or more trade goods, you may take one of his trade goods or commodities. You may exhaust this card. If you do, You and that player each draw one action card. So now this is a pretty decent agent ability. My only criticism of this is it's something that, even though you have the ability to use it from the very beginning, you are kind of restricted because you can't use it until you become neighbors with someone. But you can become neighbors with someone pretty quickly, maybe even first round. So it's not going to be really held back too much. But once you have a neighbor, you have this ability to cause them to take an extra action card and allow you to take an extra action card as well. So it can be the sort of thing where when you're not really wanting to pick a fight with someone, but you really do want to get those extra resources, you can be like, look, I'm going to take your resources, but I'll tell you what, I'm going to give you a free action card. Leave out the part that, of course, you're getting a free action card as well, because you're benefiting from it as well. But you can be like, look, no hard feelings. Look, take a free action card. I'm going to use the ability. It's cool, right? It may or may not work in that way, but also just in general, getting lots of extra action cards for yourself is good. So yeah, I do rather like Sufi and 90% smuggler, 110% energy. She is a good agent. Now, the commander is unlocked when you have 4 cruisers on the game board. This is a commander that could be unlocked first round. You start with 2 cruisers on the game board. It is very possible that the first fleet you build may wind up giving you 2 more cruisers. It's very feasible. Cruisers only cost 2 apiece, and to start with, you have 4 resources from your starting planet. If you can get some more resources through pillaging, you could easily possibly wind up with enough resources to build 2 cruisers and a carrier, which is what you really want. Now, if you're not able to, you're almost certainly going to have your commander by round 2. So the commander is Saula Mentarion, everyone's best friend. And once they are unlocked, their ability says after you win a space combat, you may force your opponent to give you 1 promissory note from their hand. So this is a character that is going to incentivize you to pick fights with people. Be careful. Now, granted, they're going to give you a promissory note. You're going to lose it if you pick another fight with them. If you want to use this character to the best of your ability, you're gonna attack someone once, be like, look, I'm just doing it to get the thing, and then you know what? Once I get your promissory note, look, let's do another deal. Give me another promissory note. I'll give you mine. I'm not gonna attack you anymore. I mean, sometimes early game, people might be desperate enough to quickly call a truce, especially if there's someone even more dangerous on their other side, that they might be willing to do a deal even after you attacked them. Especially, though, if you manage to do an attack just to get, steal the promissory note, maybe you do it in a place where you don't actually take any planets from them, it might work out. But otherwise, if you're doing it and you are picking a fight with someone, take those planets, don't worry about it, steal one of their promissory notes, and then, save it to use it later. Now, granted, they get to decide which promissory note they're giving you, but there are lots of really great promissory notes out there, and being able to force someone to give you a promissory note is very fun. Finally, we have the hero ability here, which is unlocked when you have 3 scored objectives, just like all of the heroes. And their hero is Ipswich, Loose Cannon, Mercenary Raider, and when you flip him over, once he's unlocked, he becomes Sleeper Cell Insurrection. At the start of a space combat that you are participating in, you may purge this card. If you do, for each other player's ships that is destroyed during this combat, place 1 ship of that type from your reinforcements in the active system. So this is a card you're going to save for a special occasion when you literally must win a combat. Because you're going to get, the beginning of the combat, you're going to do your best, you're going to destroy a bunch of ships. Even if your opponent wipes out your fleet completely, at the end of that combat, you get all the ships you destroyed of theirs back on your side. Now, it doesn't work if you with things like the War Sun, if you don't have War Sun tech, but you can get dreadnoughts, you can get cruisers, you could even get a flagship back if you don't have your flagship on the board, or maybe your flagship got destroyed in this combat. And the combat will keep going, and you'll get to keep fighting. So this can be game winning if it's a very important combat that you really have to win. It's best used in a specific set situation where you have picked out a particular combat that you literally cannot lose. But yeah, this is a very decent hero ability. And finally, we have their mech. And their mech is Mole, Terminus, the Mentak mech. Other players' ground forces on this planet cannot use sustained damage, otherwise pretty standard. 2 cost, 6 combat, sustained damage. So this is a ground force version of their flagship. If you're facing someone who has some really awesome mechs, this is a great way to really weaken their force, because they have 1 or 2 mechs on that planet. Suddenly they can't use sustained damage on them. If you're hitting them and doing damage, all of their hits are going to cause someone to die, either an infantry or a mech. They're going to lose someone. Next, I want to talk about their starting technologies. Now, the Mentak Coalition start with 2 techs. They start with Sarween Tools and Plasma Scoring. So Sarween Tools is one of my favorite starting techs to start with. It is a yellow tech, and it says when 1 or more of your units use production, reduce the combined cost of the produced units by 1. This is going to really help you from the beginning of the game to get those new fleets you build larger. You do need all the help you can get. So this is a very decent starting tech. And like I said, you start with 4 resources on your starting planet. Getting the 1 resource for free means now you have 5 resources to spend, even without getting anything from pillage. But to be able to get those 2 cruisers and that 1 carrier from your first build, all you will need to get is 2 resources off of somebody through the pillage ability, which means you will have to use pillage twice in the first round to be able to get that fleet going in the first round. Now, it's not super likely, but it is possible. And like I said, you'll definitely have those 4 cruisers by round 2 for sure. Now, the other starting tech is Plasma Scoring. When 1 or more of your units use bombardment or space cannon, one of those units may roll 1 additional die. So this makes your space cannons more powerful, makes your bombardment more powerful. It's not the best ability for the Mentak Coalition because they don't have any extra kind of uses for space cannons or bombardments, and they don't have any like super powerful dreadnoughts or super powerful other bombarding ships. But you know, it's a decent tech to start with. It's not bad. Now, I want to talk about what technologies I recommend, and the specific technologies I recommend are going to be just a few here. I have 3 to recommend, and there's going to be 1 yellow and 1 green specifically to help you get the 2 faction-specific techs and to help you upgrade your cruisers, because I do think cruisers are very important for the Mentak Coalition, especially because of their ability. So both of the faction-specific techs are yellow techs, and they do require you to have a decent amount of yellow techs to be able to get. The first one requires you to have 2, the second one requires you to have 3. Now, you do start with 1 in Sarween Tools, so I have 1 yellow tech to recommend to get the prerequisites for the first of the 2 faction techs, which will then give you the prerequisites for the second. So that yellow tech I recommend is Predictive Intelligence. At the end of your turn, you may exhaust this card to redistribute your command tokens. Very useful ability. And then as a second ability, when you cast votes during the agenda phase, you may cast 3 additional votes. If you do, and the outcome you voted for is not resolved, exhaust this card. So this just is very much gives you another aspect of the game to make the Mentak Coalition powerful at. It makes them good at the agenda phase. In addition to being able to redistribute their command tokens as they see fit. So this is a really decent tech for them to get, and like I said, it will put them on the road of having the prerequisites for both of the faction-specific techs. Now, I do want to recommend 1 green tech for the Mentak Coalition because it works really well for them, and it is the Neural Motivator. During the status phase, draw 2 action cards instead of 1. Now, you're already going to be getting extra action cards because of their agent ability when combined with the faction ability of Pillage, but having Neural Motivator means you're going to get even more because you're going to get an extra action card at the end of every round. So that's really awesome. In addition, it gives you the final prerequisite you need to be able to get a Cruiser Mark II, which now, again, because cruisers are so good because of the Ambush ability, upgrading your cruiser to Cruiser Mark II is awesome because it maintains that cost of 2, but its combat ups to a 6, which means when you're doing the ambush, now if you have 2 cruisers there, you get a free shot with each of them hitting on a 6 or better. It also ups their movement to 3, and it gives them a capacity of 1, so you could either be using it to carry a ground troop or a fighter to help you out in space combat and take hits for you. So yes, I really believe you should definitely try to upgrade your cruisers to Mark IIs at some point during the game. Now let's talk about the faction-specific techs and why I think they're so awesome and why I think you should try to get them. So the first one is Salvage Operations. It is a yellow tech with a 2 technology prerequisite. After you win or lose a space combat, gain 1 trade good. If you won the combat, you may also produce 1 ship in that system of any ship type that was destroyed during the combat. Now, that's any ship from either side that was destroyed during the combat. Getting to produce 1 immediately is great because you get to build back up your fleet. Plus, getting the free trade good means that you're going to get some extra money towards building that ship. So yeah, Salvage Operations is a really good technology. Highly recommend it. And then their other technology is Mirror Computing. This one's even better. It requires you to have 3 yellow techs, and it is worthy of that top tier status. When you spend trade goods, each trade good is worth 2 resources or 2 influence instead of 1. You are playing a faction that is going to be stockpiling resources. It's going to be stealing resources from other players, and having all of those doubled in value is insane. You're going to be very rich once you get this out because all your resources are suddenly going to be worth double their value. It's going to be very difficult to keep up with your fleet building capabilities for the other players once you have both Salvage Operations and Mirror Computing out. Again, because Salvage Operations also is going to give you free trade goods that are now doubled in value. So, yes, please. Really awesome stuff. All right, so now let's talk about the strategy cards and which ones I think are most important. So for round 1, I think Warfare is going to very much be most important because after you build your first fleet, you're going to want to get it moving right away and get to colonize another system, as well as you're going to want to be able to move ships so you can try to become neighbors with someone as quickly as possible to get the pillage ability off, to get some extra resources, to get stuff going really quickly. Either way, you're going to want to use Warfare, regardless of whether you're using it to try to become neighbors with someone or try to colonize an extra planet. Now, the problem is Warfare is super high desired. So what other ones are good to go for, either if you don't get Warfare or if you are playing only 3 players and are able to grab a second one. Technology is really good because while they don't have a huge number of technologies they want to get, they do want to go up those tech trees pretty quickly to be able to get their faction-specific techs, like I already said, so that will be very useful. In addition, trade is always going to be really good with the Mentak Coalition because you can give someone you're a neighbor with the ability to replenish their commodities, do a deal with them, and then pillage them, because that's how that works, and that is really awesome. So maybe not the first round, but once you are neighbors with someone, getting trade is really decent. Once you're far out enough in your pie wage of the galaxy that you need to get some more space stocks built, construction will be good. And then, you know, politics and diplomacy and leadership are kind of lesser important for the Mentak Coalition, but each of them have their times when they will be needed. Leadership to get yourself some more command tokens. Imperial also, of course, to be able to score extra victory points, and the secondary ability on Imperial, of course, to get yourself some more secret objectives. And, of course, you know, politics to stack the political deck in your favor. Of course, keeping in mind that I did recommend predictive intelligence, which will help you then during those times when you were voting on agendas, and of course diplomacy to keep someone from stabbing you in the back. But yes, to start with, I think pretty standard. Technology, warfare, and trade are going to be very important for the Mentak Coalition. Now, let's talk about what secret objectives are really great if you manage to get or find using the secondary ability of the Imperial card. What secret objectives would be really good for the Mentak Coalition? I've got a number here. So the first one I've got is Betray a Friend. Win a combat against a player whose promissory note you had in your play area at the start of your tactical action. So this one's going to be really easy to do because of your abilities of how you can force someone to give you a promissory note. And then you can attack them. So that is going to be one that is very, very achievable. Also, we have Strengthened Bonds. Have another player's promissory note in your play area. Again, same reason, it's going to be very easy to achieve. If you manage to get both of these very early, you can very quickly get a point for each of them. Very easy with the Mentak Coalition. Next, we have Discard 5 action cards. Now, again, the Mentak Coalition starts with an ability to gain extra action cards, and if you get the Neural Motivator, getting even more extra action cards, you could very easily get enough to just discard 5 and get that point. Next, we have own 2 faction technologies. Now, again, both of your faction technologies are the same color. You start with 1 tech of that color, and all you need is 1 more of that color, which I recommended was the predictive intelligence, to go up that tree and get those 2 faction techs. They're both awesome. You're going to want to get them. This is going to be one that you're definitely going to achieve at some point during the game. Next, we have Horde raw materials. Control planets that have a combined resource value of at least 12. You start with a resource value of 4 on your starting planet. It's a third of the way there. This is going to happen very easily. Next, be neighbors with all other players. You have a crazy incentive to want to be neighbors with people. You are going to want to try to take systems with wormholes in them because it will allow you to be neighbors with people that you wouldn't necessarily be neighbors with otherwise. Also, taking Mechatol Rex usually means you're going to wind up being neighbors with most, if not all, of the players on the board. And these guys are going to have a high incentive to do so they can start pillaging everybody. And finally, we have Unveil Flagship, win a space combat in a system that contains your flagship. You cannot score this objective if your flagship is destroyed in the combat. So again, with that tricksy ability of your flagships to not allow your opponents to use sustained damage, they could be coming at you in a part of the galaxy and think they're going to be doing really well because they've got a bunch of dreadnoughts and you've just got a bunch of cruisers, but then you merge in with cruisers and your flagship and come into their system and wipe out their dreadnoughts because 1 hit each is going to kill them. And maybe you've upgraded your cruisers to Cruiser Mark II, so now they're hitting on 6s instead of 7s. That could be really, really awesome, and you could really catch somebody by surprise with this flagship. So there you have it. These are my ideas for the Mentak Coalition. You're going to want to use a lot of, quick attacks, but then make peace. You're going to want to become neighbors with a lot of people so you can steal stuff from them, but then also give them stuff. You'd be like, oh, well, I stole some resources from you, but don't worry, I'm going to give you an action card. It's no big deal. You're going to do a lot of this tricksy stuff back and forth. You're going to wind up with huge hand of action cards with lots of cool abilities to play. These guys can be very competitive. They're very interesting. They're very tricksy. Their only downside is their lousy starting fleet being that you can't colonize 2 systems generally in the first round unless you get really lucky and get the right things to happen and get to do a couple of pillages. But from round 2 on, they're going to be a major competitor in the game. And if you play them right, you can possibly win the game of Twilight Imperium with the Mentak Coalition. So there you have it. If you enjoyed this episode of Grokking Twilight Imperium and you'd like to see me do more episodes like this, be sure to give it a like, share it on all forms of social media, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to the Board Game Captain. That's Captain spelled a K on YouTube. And until next time, game on. Hello, Nico. What is going on? I know I'm filming, right? So you're like, yeah, you're filming. You're filming. I gotta interrupt. Okay. Go chew on your toys.